So the last piece we haven't textured yet is actually our upholstered part. And we will start with leather. So again, little tip, before we do anything, Google reference photos because they help you to understand how glossy is something. How strong do you see a three-dimensional structure we have to imitate via bump mapping? And for example, how much also in those shadow areas do you not see any reflection? And maybe is there, in addition, some sort of a structure happening or like a deformation on it? So here, obviously, we have a lot of creases, and that's possible to do on a computer. I can show you that. It's a secondary step of sculpting. But also here you can see there are little structures in addition to it. Because everything what we do in computer graphics is very perfect, and very often in nature there's imperfection, so we have to bring it back. So we can look for leather texture, but actually you want to look for seamless leather texture. And let's take a look. And also here we have the same requirements. Don't load small images and don't use anything that has highlights, etc. in it. And you want to look for textures that are nicely tileable, so you do not see a repetition. For example, this should be seamless, but we can clearly see how it tiled, so that is not very good. This doesn't look too bad, and for example, this also seems to look like it has no significant tiling effect. And even when you have a very small image, it might not be a big problem because we will tile it later. So for example, here I noticed this image is photoshopped heavily because we can see where the stamp worked. So this image is not very good because it has some blurriness to it. That might actually later show up in the rendering. You will not be able to use something like this where you have specific veins because we can't really tile this ideally. Then you would need to have like a complete big piece of leather photographed, which then we can wrap over our computer model. But we will in this exercise focus on using structures, something like this. So on my desktop, I have downloaded some very basic textures here, and those I will use. I will actually show you how we can make use of this really small image and texture our complete object. Okay, so I will turn this one into the UV editor, and I will switch to this view. So step number one, what we have to do is I have to turn this off. We need to identify where we do the seams. And I will do, as you can see, this at the back here. There. And the same also for this part there. Because in real life we might wrap the leather or the fabric a little bit around, and then from the bottom we would just nail gun it, put another cover over it, and then it will be mounted onto the wooden shell. So not a big deal. What we don't see will not be big of an issue for us. So we can select this one and then press U to unwrap, and here now we have the back face and we have the front faces. This is a little bit crooked, not sure why Blender did it, but not a big deal. We can rotate it correctly and then shear it and de-stress it, so it will at one point look correct. But if we compare this to our object, we can clearly see this is kind of roundish and this is squarish, so that's not going to fit. So before I load a leather texture, we will do something different first. I will make myself a new image, and this is maybe wider than high, so I can call this one UV texture. And maybe we use the UV grid, and then we could say, okay, good. So what is this UV grid texture useful for? Let me show you. We will create a material there, and then we will add an image texture. Where is it? There. And then load this UV texture into it. And then here we can switch to material view and look at what we have. So you can clearly see the stress or distortions of the fabric. The back looks kind of okay, it's just vertically stretched, but this is vertically stretched and the corners are terrible. And that's simply because, well, this doesn't follow the same shape. So let me show you how we can quickly fix this. First, this part here I can move to somewhere else, I don't need it. And then here, let's move it to there. So first, for example, in relationship to this image, this has to be maybe scaled together, so I start seeing blocks, squares again. Good. But then these corner points here are wrong. And in my model, this is a square. Here, this is a triangle. And a triangular shape is being forced, stretched over a square surface. Well, that doesn't work. So we have to change it. And actually, I realized this is rotated. And there. So let's work on the top now. I moved those out, I moved them up a little bit, and I try to move these points so I will actually get a more or less even grid pattern again. It's not possible to completely de-stress it so it's perfect, but also in real life the material might stretch a little bit, so we just have to make it believable. And there we are already. You see? This looks pretty good. Okay, we can do the same with there. Just have to unwrap it. So I'm not sure which way I have to rotate it correctly. So let's see, what are those? Okay, those are on the corner. So this actually will look like this way. Okay, G and Y. Maybe scale it out a little bit so we force more content on it. This also goes down. Scale outway, so S and X, and then G and Y to move it down. These sides are more flat, so this has to go inwards, and look, the outside de-stresses. Yeah. There. Let's see, this probably has to go in a little bit. Yeah. Maybe a little bit outwards. Okay, so I tried to follow the same structure. And also now here, this looks pretty good and usable. Okay, so that was kind of like our first and most important part. De-stress everything so it looks uniform. Because when you have a normal texture like a leather, you have so much noise, it's difficult to spot those distortions. Distortions are bad because the pattern gets distorted, but also maybe because the texture is stretched, the density, so the resolution will get smaller and blurry, and that will show up in the rendering. And that's not good. Okay, so number one is done. So now we can actually add our not environment texture, we can add our image texture. and then load maybe our black and white leather there. So this is way too big. I would like this one to be smaller. So what I need is first something that tells me what type of vector or coordinate system I will use, and then we will also need a mapping so we can tile it more. There, and then maybe 5. There we are. So this is a pretty good texture. You see it's small, it tiles well. You can see that there are some noticeable patterns, but they're really well hidden. They're hard to spot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There I can see it. Okay. Yeah, so this texture, for example, works well. Let's maybe load a different texture, maybe this one. There, looks also really nice. From the top, how does it look? Yeah, good, nice. Okay, I will go back to the black one, because the color we will more or less simply define via the diffuse, and then we will create a glossy with a bump mapping. So mix shader and then glossy. We would like to have a layer weight and also override maybe the strength. Yeah, 50%. This maybe 0.05. Okay, let's show the studio. Let's do rendering. Okay, so now this looks like some sort of polyester material, and we would like to have the bump mapping added. So we have all the stuff ready here. We have actually a black and white image and we can use in this case. So bump mapping, plug this one in, properly 0.1, normal. Let's take a look. Wrong direction, invert, yeah. It's maybe too big, so we will set this to 8. Yeah, this feels size-wise better. So bump mapping and roughness are more or less one and the same thing in reality. If we have a sandblasted surface, we can roughen it up with a really fine bump mapping, or we can roughen it up in rendering by using the roughness value. The roughness value is more blurring the reflection, and the bump mapping adds the highlights, etc. So very often what we do is simply we use both together, and they simulate a three-dimensional structure on our object. Okay, not too bad. Maybe 0.05 to make this effect more subtle. Yeah, that's nice. Okay. So now we can see what happens if maybe we add this one to there. Now it gets a nice black richness. Maybe make this a tick darker. There's also no pure black and pure white in computer graphics, or in real life, I mean. So don't want to use it that way. And whoops, wrong one. No, there. The white lines in the texture are distracting and look like highlights. So I will keep it simply this way and drive my color via this. If I want, I could actually add cloud texture, so I have some sort of color variation on my diffuse. I will leave this out for the moment. Let's say this is an artificial leather we created. uniformly colorized. The thing that's missing is actually imperfections on the surface. This is all too smooth and perfect. So how could we change that? So what we will do is now add some displacement to the geometry. So this bump mapping fakes three-dimensional structure, or we can also add actual three-dimensional structure variations to our object. So what I will do is I will set this to 2, and then this bend command will bend it, and then we can add another subdivision by 2. So now this is very fine. And then we will add a displacement modifier. Oh, it's like huge, so 0.001 to make it small. And the displacement modifier makes it shrink and grow. And there you can see it. And I want this to be restricted only to maybe this ring around and then those top faces. So those vertices, not those vertices here. And I do this simply because this will be flat, the wood will press against it, I can't simulate it or I can model it, and I can simply decide that only those points, those faces which are selected will grow a little bit. So with these points selected, I can go to the vertex group, assign a new group, maybe let's call this one displace, and then here I say use this displace. Let's take a look. There you see that it doesn't do anything to the bottom. Perfect, so this is pretty good. Okay, so but this displace currently grows uniform. I want there to be a structure. So we can add a texture. I also call this displace, and then we can go to the texture tab, say we can work with the cloud to make this easier to see. Let's set this to a 1. There you can see the structure. So by the way, when you go to a texture, you have like texture for a modifier or brushed, so they will all be listed here. So what do we have here? We have the depth that adds more or removes detail. We also have a size, 0.1 makes it really small, 0.5 makes it bigger. Looks like that doesn't add any more. 20 to 30. Which value did I use? Oh, 0.5. And I went to 21. Yeah, maybe 1. This looks interesting. You see now, you can really see how this is displaced. So the quality of the displacement is driven by how many points we have. So you see this is my first subdivision, and the first subdivision will help the bend command to have enough points to bend nicely, and then this end result we subdivide a tick more, so all these points then can be moved. And when I add more subdivisions, which means more points and more structural detail, and you see this looks kind of like a moon landscape. If we set this to 2, it gets softer. Maybe something like this will be fine, and 0.05 there. Okay, not too bad. So let's take a look how this maybe affects our rendering. There you see now those waves in there. Perfect. So then there now we can decide how many subdivisions do we really need to add a little bit of irregularity to it. Careful with too high values. The 5 you see already is doing a lot. I mean, we should have saved before. Whew. It worked out, didn't crash. Yeah, it's actually not too bad. So we could actually, for render time, set this to 5, and then the view set this to 2 or 3, so it's easier to see. I will leave it at this and maybe 0.025, lower this a tick so that effect is less noticeable. Because ideally this should really simulate very, very tiny variations, and I spotted something, for example, here in those areas. There's something happening. But that's more a structural element of the leather, otherwise it looks nice and smooth. But also here, you see there's something happening here, and also there. And we can see this there and there. So you deal with two things, the geometry, maybe by manufacturing or stuff behind that pulls stuff, but then also folds or, well, in general when the stuff is compressed. So let's do the same with this one as well. We want to select only those specific faces here. Let's turn this one off for the moment so it's easier to see. So U plus U. So all those vertices. Displace and assign, and then I can simply select this upholstery, Control L, and say modify, so it copies everything over. Oh no, I shouldn't do it because it would override actually my other commands here. So I have to do this by hand because those are not the same objects. To do displace, but it's not really difficult. All these values already here. I just have to plug them in correctly. Oh, this looks interesting, like a MakerBot failed print. 0.01 I think we used. 0.025. There. Let's take a look. Beautiful. Look at that amazing reflection. This looks really natural, like how it would be if we turn this one off. It just looks too clean. Okay, so maybe let's keep it at this for the moment for the leather part. And let's save before it crashes. So the last thing to look at is maybe fabric. Also there again, take a look at reference photos, but one big warning to fabric. This is an insanely difficult material, not because of the texture, but because fabric, like if you take a look at this image here, or there are fibers at those rims. They're also like knots on top. This is not a flat surface like wood. This is actually more, think about it like a three-dimensional structure, which essentially fabric is because we weave it. So we can't get 100% close, but we can make it believable. And again, look at reference photos. They really help you to understand maybe about the shininess, the flatness. So this actually looks like a very flat material. You see there's hardly any reflectivity compared to, for example, leather. Also based on what type of material, is it polyester, cotton, or so. You will have different values. So when we go online and, for example, type in seamless fabric texture, We can see linen, cotton, etc., mesh. So you want also here to find something that is nice and tileable. So I'm not sure about this one. Maybe let's try it. How does this one look? And also here, for example, you can easily see how it tiles. Not really very good. I think this photo I downloaded already. Maybe drag this one down, and you can just Google around. There are many websites where you can look for fabric patterns. I will just make a denim one in addition there. Okay, perfect. So let's go then to Blender, and I will work with the same mesh, but I do not want the texture to get lost. So I actually click on this F, which means this leather material, we added a fake user, because Blender, every time we quit it, throws everything out. Nobody is using. So if you have 2 objects and 3 materials, one material will get lost. And for example, here I can click the X. Now we should see that this material has 2 users, and the X. And if we go to leather, you see there's an F in front. So that means it has a fake user. If there's a 0, that means nobody's using it, and if you save and quit, that thing would be gone. So to work a little bit faster, I turn this simply off. The UV unwrapping we have done, we don't have to do it again. So let's create a fabric material. And the fabric material has a special property we will take a look at, because we have to simulate those fibers that stick up. So UV and there, texture there, and then let's see what texture will work first with. Maybe let's use this fabric here. Okay, so Control L, same material link. Let's do a rendering. Let's see how this looks. Not too bad. So scale is wrong, so maybe 3. Yeah, that works actually. What we see, he seems to be a seam. So there we have a small issue also there, we can see it. So this texture is actually not really that seamless, to be honest. But maybe leave it for the moment. We have to add a bump mapping. So we can go to vector, bump there, plug it in, and then black and white. So convert. Oh, where did it go to? There. Oh, I added it there. Wah, wah. This goes to there. This makes no sense because there we have the bump in between. Zip, zip. Maybe this turn off, and maybe we can, for example, make this dark, and then maybe a 0.1. Now we zoom in a little bit. We can maybe try to see how far of the bump mapping can we see. A 0.5. There is something happening. Okay, maybe we can bring this one back to there. Okay, so this kind of like this bump mapping is something you would like to add. So we maybe take a look at this. Let's clean this up render-wise a little bit, and then we do a screenshot and compare. Okay, and let's turn this one off. And there. Okay, and let's see where are my screenshots there. So with bump map, without. And you see with the bump map, it's not as bright. There are more shadow parts on it, and that's more realistic. Okay, so that's step number one. But you also see that sometimes there are these rims, highlights on it. Also interesting in this photo how much, for example, this part is blown out. Always good to pay attention to those. So you see that sometimes in your renderings, when you have it, it's okay, because in certain photography environments we will have the same. So how do we do, for example, these rims? So what I will do now is turn this one off for the moment, and then I will make a copy of this, make this simply maybe white there. I could, for example, add a mixer and there, mix this white material on it. Then I will use the layer weight there and there. And let's see how this, for example, works. Maybe I turn this one off so it's black. And then based on the angle, you can see that I will get a small rim color on it. Only, yeah, along surfaces that are more like here, tangent to my view. And then the perpendicular remain flat. So this is one very easy way how, for example, you could fake this. And then also again there, another math node, zip, and there, and maybe, what about we do it this way, 0, 5, and then 2.01. I was just curious, maybe we clamp it down a little bit more and then we increase the strength, but yeah, we can do it this way. That's fine. So oh, I forgot this one to feed in. That's the reason why I was missing it. Okay, good. Obviously on really bright materials you might not see this really well. So I swapped out the texture with a darker one, so we can actually see this effect a little bit better. This is actually a texture I found at Chauffeur, pretty amazing website. And the size also seems to be, the way how I adjusted it, good. Is maybe a tick too small, maybe 1.5. No, I just will leave it at 1. Okay, so currently we have the layer weight, and we multiply it to tone it down, and then, for example, here we add the diffuse as a quick way to simulate kind of like this rim shininess. There's actually a variation to this I would like to show you. We use instead an RGB curve. So let's rearrange this for the moment. There and there. Okay, so as you see, there's no difference because currently it's like from a black to white line, so I don't really adjust the values. But what I can do is I can actually massage this curve, and you will see I will increase or decrease the effect. So how could I actually explain this the best? So yeah, maybe let's do it this way. Now we will go and create a sphere there. Let's scale the sphere down, height. There, let's shade this sphere. Okay, and the sphere should have the same material. Okay, so, and let's do a rendering there. So let's pull this back. So there now you can clearly see how the blend command from the outside to the center fades out in a rather uniform way. So same here. But now if, for example, we lower this, you will see kind of like the geometry remains the same, so the blend, but actually I decreased the strength to the outside. But how it blends will remain being linear. I can also move this one up. See, then actually we do a reverse, we increase power to it. Okay, and then when we move this one down, you see the center and the outside part have the same values, but how I blend, how quickly remains the same. So for example here, well, this doesn't make sense there. We will have a very small rim of the same value, and maybe this way, no, I think this side will be brighter more over bigger surface. So if I compress this a little bit, we should see, yeah, kind of like this really bright line. So maybe there. Here you can see it comes over and then zip, fades out. So just as an alternative to how maybe from the side you can even make the reflection even stronger and then massage it a little bit more. So by using the RGB curve node. So let's bring this one back in, and then this here will remove, show the rest, and let's zoom in. And this is actually now a pretty nice effect, how you can see the kind of like the highlights on it. This area is untouched, and then there we see a little bit of that fuzziness. So then there's a question, do I like it? Do I maybe need to lower this a little bit? And you see I can pull that effect backwards a little bit. But by having a curve, the maximum overlay, the brightness remains the same, just how quickly I blend to there changes. Okay, so this is a very basic way to quickly create some artificial looking cotton material that's rather diffuse, and because it's a three-dimensional object we have those fibers, and then there actually they will illuminate and give you those rim effects. Obviously with the backrest you see it's not working the same way, so this is still not 100% believable, but it's also a very, very difficult material to do right if you want to be physically, optically really accurate. But honestly, those small details most times people who do this stuff will see, and the general user might actually not really see it. So let's see how this one looks like when we maybe add a denim material to it, just for giggles. There, ooh, way too small, so 5. There now we have the same thing made out of kind of like a jeans material. Actually, that's a pretty well tileable texture. That one works well. And I couldn't resist like an English sock grandpa uses. Let's use that one. There we have it. That also works pretty well. So you see, again, the nodes have a really nice advantage of you create structures, so like a workflow, and then later we only have to swap out one time the material, and then all the different passes like bump mapping, etc., all will be updated at the same time. So a little bit upfront work, and then later everything can be nicely automated. And there we are. A Charles Eames chair, pretty classic, with probably the worst fabric texture ever selected for it. There's a tiny detail I forgot to point out, and that is that we use this bump mapping for our main material to create the structure. You see I removed the texture and you can see the bump mapping. But then what we do with the second diffuse, which we use as a fake attempt to simulate those fibers, this looks like a nice and glossy overlay. And that's not okay. We need to add, for example, the bump mapping to there as well. So inside this highlight structure, or inside this highlight feature, we can also maybe see this structure a little bit, so it doesn't look so much like a film we glued over it. So it's a tiny detail, but actually when this renders out more cleaner, you will easily see that to a certain degree. So this is actually better now.